Welcome to episode 9 of Making the Changes. Now, one frustrating aspect of learning jazz guitar is when you analyse and break down solos. A lot of soloists take an arpeggio-based approach, but there's certainly more to their phrases than just chord tones. Now, the use of chord tones give their phrases, their solos, a sense of what might be called harmonic clarity. But it's the other things they add in which make those chord tones stand out even more and provide that harmonic clarity. And this video is going to be unashamedly basic, and it's going to cover two ingredients that help bring those chord tones to the forefront. And that is the chromatic note beneath the chord tone and the scale note above. Now, those are sometimes referred to as upper and lower neighbour tones. Firstly, let's go back to acknowledge our strong foundations, and that is just being able to play 1, 3, 5, 7 as the chords change. And in this case, I'm doing this over the A section to Autumn Leaves, the backing tracks on the lowest tier of my Patreon. I'm not going to dress that up and pretend that's exciting in any way. That is just solid foundations. And I think quite often in a lot of videos I notice on YouTube, people don't acknowledge the foundation work and the hard graft they've had to do in order to do interesting things with arpeggios or scales. But for me, practicing that, it provides you with two crucial things. Fretboard knowledge, knowing where to find your arpeggios and being able to do that as chords change in time. And second thing, you develop your ear. You move from being able to hear an A minor 7, recognise that's a minor 7 chord, to knowing the individual sound of the notes in that chord. Do, 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 and getting familiar with that. Because that internalisation is absolutely key to being able to improvise. I'd like to acknowledge here that probably for a lot of guitarists out there, that can be quite humbling if you stick on a backing track for, say, I don't know all the things you are. Could you hit the arpeggios in quarter notes or eighth notes? I think it's something a lot of people skip over the foundations and then wonder why they can't solo. I'd also say that as important as what I've just said is developing your ear, your fretboard knowledge, you've got to be engaging with really doing a lot of listening to soloists that you admire, because you want to learn to imitate them essentially and taking inspiration from them, but really getting familiar with the language that you hear on recordings, because it will help you when it comes to your own soloing. Now for the new element in today's lesson, we're going to break this down into two separate things. We've got the chromatic note underneath and the note above. Let's deal with the chromatics first. Now my approach to soloing, which has largely come from imitating my favourite musicians, I noticed over time that chord tones were placed in prominent places. So whether that be at the start of the phrase or an end of a phrase, one of the classic things I notice when listening to people playing, studying jazz guitar, well, obviously, or still learning, is that they finish on a note that doesn't sound resolved. And not that you want to finish every phrase on a chord tone, but it does make it sound stronger if you do. Other places prominently you could place them could be that you might have the highest note of a phrase being a chord tone or the lowest note of your phrase being a chord tone, so that it really emphasizes it. That will give your solos the harmonic clarity that you need. Obviously that doesn't apply if you're trying to play free jazz or jazz odyssey, and maybe you're on the wrong video if that's the case. One thing I also noticed is that harmonic clarity also came across. The chord tones stood out more because of the contrast against things like chromatics and notes above, which we're going to look at today. And we'll split this lesson into two halves. Firstly, we'll look at adding a chromatic approach note, a semitone, so a fret below our chord tones. And then we'll look at adding a scale note above our chord tones. Chromaticism itself is a big topic. There's different ways you can employ chromaticism. You can approach a note from above, below. You can do what's called double chromatics. We just limit ourselves to chromatic approach notes, a semitone below. So Autumn Leaves we've been looking at in this series is in E minor. So if we took an E minor 7 arpeggio, so 1, 3, 5, 7, I'm just going to approach each of those notes from a semitone below, and that's what we call a chromatic approach note. Now, sometimes that note will be outside of the key, so non-diatonic. Other times it might actually happen to be in the scale, but still thinking of it as an approach note underneath your chord tones. So you've got the root approached underneath by a major 7, got a minor 3rd approached by the 2nd, You got the 5th, approached by a flat 5. You got the 7th, approached by a major 6. You can hear there's this kind of out, in, out, in, out, in. Now, one piece of advice you often hear with chromaticism is that they work better placed on the and, so on the weaker half of the beat. You know, if you divide a bar 4, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and put them on the and. Now, let's just compare. Here they are on the beat, the chromatics on the beat, the chord tones on the second half of the beat on the and. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I put them on the and, I'm going to come in on the and of 4 here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And carried it on up there. I would personally, when it comes to playing jazz, I don't like the idea of there being like hard and fast rules, like it has to be this way only. The amount of times I've transcribed stuff and I see chromatics on the first half of the beat, so on the strong half of the beat, it happens. It's I think they naturally do sound less confronting, they sound less odd when they're placed on the and, but plenty of soloists make it work on the stronger half of the beat as well. And going back to foundations, it's probably easier for you to get used to them, to do them on the strong half of the beat first, but just remember that people often place them on the and. We could take the chords to autumn leaves and we could apply our chromatic approach notes beneath the 1, 3, 5, 7 of each chord, like this. So if we took A minor 7, approach each of them from a semitone below, we're going to have D7, G major 7, C major 7, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, B7, E minor 7. Now, I'll share something with you here that I personally think, and this is subjective, but I think it sounds better on the 1, 3 and the 5 and not the 7th. So like if I just did it I don't think it is like, that was just on 1 through 5 by the way. Of course it can be made to work. I think any note can be made to work with strong phrasing and strong rhythm, but I just prefer it on the, I think it's because 1, 3, 5 is so strong, such a strong triadic, structure, but that is subjective. So one thing you could try is then try doing the outline, so doing the arpeggio, but with a chromatic approach note like this. And that's kind of the exercise to get your head around it, right? It's not musical, it's just about getting your head around finding the chromatics, what they sound like, being able to play them, and so forth. Here they are in a more kind of musical example with phrasing. One thing there in the previous example, I was doing a chromatic before every note. Of course, that's not necessarily how you're going to use them. Might just do them to one note. Say if I took A minor 7, I might just put a chromatic before the first note, before the root. Just to open the door a little bit more on chromatics, you could put that chromatic note a semitone above instead of below. Like that. Those two things could combine and we could enclose the root note with a chromatic note below, then above, then landing on our root. 1, 2, 3. Try that the other way around. Above, below, root note. 1, 2, 3. think I prefer the second one. The one thing I'd encourage you to experiment with is putting those chromatics not on every note necessarily, but maybe before one note. Say if I did it before the fifth, before the third, before the seventh, then before the root at the end. I went back to down to the chromatic and back up. Those chromatics offer the opportunity of tension and release. We go chromatic to the release of a chord tone. Now, adding in a bit more colour with the note above is what we're going to look at now. Well, what we're going to add in is the scale note above. So we're in the key of E minor for this Autumn Leaves. So if I took the E minor scale, we'd have the following notes: E, F sharp, G, A, B, C, D, E. With our one chord being the 1, 3, 5, 7, E minor 7 arpeggio. Now, if I then put the scale note above, E, G, B, D, I'm going to go F sharp, E, A to G, C to B, and then E to D. So like this. And maybe to round it off, let's do F sharp to E again. Sorry. You hear this again, it's kind of, it's not outside sounding, but that note above makes the chord tone stand out a little bit more. What we then do is take the chords in the rest of the song and say the first chord, A minor 7, the root is A, scale note above from our key will be a B. So I'd go, so 1, 3, 5, 7, A, C, E, G, I go B, A, the C, the third, D to C, the fifth, and E, I'm going to go F sharp down to it, and the seventh, a G, I put an A above it. So go like that. If I rolled that out to all of the chords, we'd get this. And like with the chromatics, whilst you might initially practice it, doing it to every note, you don't need to do that when you're trying to like do things with it. So say take A minor 7. If I did it before the root, but nothing else, like that. If I did it before the third, before the fifth, and just play about with that idea there. And the final thing we look at today is combining the chromatic below with the scale note above to make that in-between chord tone really stand out. Let's take A minor 7. Again, just looking at my music on the screen, check where I positioned it. If you've got the root and A here, we're going to do note above, chromatic below. So going, A's our target note, the root. We're going note above from the scale, B, G sharp, our chromatic underneath to A. Next note of the scale is a C. We're going to go D, B, C. Next note of the chord is an E. We're going to go F sharp above, D sharp below to the E. Next note of the chord is a G. Scale note above would be an A. Chromatic below would be an F sharp. Combine that. And it's putting that chord tone front and center there. It makes it really stand out. So, any questions, you leave them below. Don't forget the backing track is available on the lowest tier of my Patreon page, which gives you access to all of my chord melodies also. So, check that out, link in the description. Just to say, really, I'm showing you components of phrasing here. I think you have to practice them in a matter-of-fact, exercise basic way just to get your head around it first. But then it's taking that next step and trying to be creative with it. And trying to create ideas, going like, right, okay, I've got 1, 3, 5, 7. What happens if I, add a chromatic before the fifth, or use the scale note above, or combine those elements? You don't have to do it to every note in the chord, but that might be how you practice it just to get your head around it. I think then has to come, like I say, a lot of listening and either transcribing or learning solos through someone else's transcription. And being able to look at someone's solo and go, that's a fifth, and they're approaching it by a chromatic, and just understanding it rather than just taking it just playing it. Anyway, thank you for tuning in. Please do leave a comment and hit that like button. It really does help. Until next time, you take care.